Generally, I will speak to you about transition progress in the Balkans countries. Why that? I will connect this with another relatively controversial issue today, and that is how we do measure the performance of those countries in transition. So after a brief literature review, I will go into some analysis and I will explain you our results, what we have done at my faculty. First of all, what did we know about economic performance under transition at the beginning of transition? Almost nothing. We knew that there will be certain transition recession. We were not fully aware how long it could last. And I must remind you that by the year 2005-2006, that is some 16 years after the start of this process, a good half of transition economies did not succeed to achieve their pre-transition level of output of their GDP. Moreover, both good and bad runners substantially differ regarding their growth rates. So what can explain such huge differences between the countries? What we know from the literature, there are some seminal papers put by DeMello, Jeffrey Sachs, and the others, and generally they taught us that policy predominantly matters, the policy of the country, whether it will grow faster or not. Although allow for initial conditions of a country to have some influence, but fading out over time, and the policy should be more and more important. How they have measured policies? Usually by the so-called composite liberalization index constructed in World Bank, or by EBRD, European Bank for Research and for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD indices or assessments that they give to certain processes within the big process of transition. The first to question that idea that policy only matters were Oslund and Ali in '96, who found that liberalization index could be insignificant under certain circumstances. Kruger and Siorko in '98 were among the first to point out that liberalization speed could be affected by initial condition itself, thus becoming an indigenous variable in the model, or in the event. So did Popov in 2000. He again pointed out the importance of initial conditions, and further on, some new variables entered the analysis, expressing institutional capacity of the country, which proved also very significant for the growth rates. And that was where we are today, although there are ideas that even institutional capacity is indigenous and affected by initial conditions as well. So what we can summarize of all these things? The two approaches on what affects performance predominantly were liberalization and privatization speed as a policy measure, and on the other side there were initial conditions and institutional level, which actually makes speed of liberalization and privatization indigenous. What do these two approaches? They actually reflect an older discussion, Big Bang or gradualist approach in transforming the system of an economy. And in light of these findings, I should try to analyze these approaches and to check what they could help us and whether they could help us in the case of Balkan countries. Why just Western Balkan countries? I will remind you that on the eve of the transition process, a big part of the Western Southeastern Europe was known as the former Yugoslavia, a country that has dissolved by the early 90s. You don't have here just the colors which will depict the area of former Yugoslavia. Probably you can guess what that covers. So what did happen there? At the beginning of transition process, the country was seen as a candidate for fast and successful changes because of its institutional arrangement developed already within '50s, and known as self-management or labor-managed economy in the literature, with many market-oriented elements. We know now, moreover, that former Yugoslav republics exhibited significantly smaller distortions in trade and in the structure of the economies than the other East European countries. And finally, there was the sound transition project at the beginning in former Yugoslavia by 89-90. So what did happen? Despite a satisfactory outcome of that program, an angry debate was speeding up in the country on the state reorganization. But in fact, it only reflects much deeper differences in the politics of various parts of the country, whether the country will be transformed in line with contemporary trends of liberalization and transition, or will it follow the old collectivistic pattern, which, unsurprisingly, in absence of the former ideology, was converted into nationalism as a simplest ideology when you want to keep collectivist ideas. Under these circumstances, the breakup of the country was almost inevitable. And the outcome was this one. These are the lines for all former Yugoslav republics of their GDP per capita output. And you can see here Slovenia, which was almost in line with predictions of what transition would be. So it had relatively shallow transition recession, coming back relatively fast. On the other hand, however, you had, for instance, Bosnia and Herzegovina, which dropped significantly, but there was a terrible war there, and that added to this poor performance. Then you have Macedonia, which was the least developed, almost the least developed there, which was plunging a little bit, but still not so deeply. Then you have here Croatia, which was the second most developed, but went down relatively fast, which is not yet the cause of the war. The war will happen onwards, and the effects of the war. And finally, Serbia and Montenegro, which remained together, that plunged also very, very much.